My name is Cindy, I'm 24 years old, and if you'd asked me a year ago what the worst kind of betrayal feels like, I probably would have shrugged and said something dumb about a high school boyfriend. But trust me, nothing, and I mean nothing, compares to the day you realize your own parents sold out your future for someone else's comfort. I grew up in a small town in Ohio, the kind of place where everybody knows what everyone else had for dinner and rumors spread faster than wildfire. My family wasn't poor, but we weren't rich either. My parents had always told me they'd been saving for my college since I was little, and by the time I graduated high school, that number was just over $100,000. It was supposed to be my ticket out, to study architecture in Chicago, to live in a city where I didn't have to run into old teachers at the grocery store, to finally breathe. But then came Jason, my older brother. He's 30, but he acts like he's 17. He's the type who starts businesses that never make it past the first month, who borrows money and forgets to pay it back, who somehow always manages to be the golden child. He announced he wanted to buy a house with his fiancée, and my parents, well, they saw him as settling down. They said he needed stability. So, one afternoon, I came home to find the papers signed. My college fund, gone. They handed it over to the bank as a down payment for Jason's new 3-bedroom suburban dream. At first, I thought it was some kind of cruel joke. I asked, what about my tuition, and my dad had the nerve to say, "You're smart, Cindy. You'll figure it out. Scholarships, loans, it'll build character." I felt my stomach drop. $100,000. My entire future. Just vanished. When Jason moved in with his fiancée, my parents threw a barbecue to celebrate. Neighbors came, everyone toasted, and I stood there, holding a plastic cup of warm soda, watching them laugh as if nothing had been stolen from me. That night, I made a decision. If they wanted to side with Jason, if they thought I'd roll over and accept it, they had another thing coming. This wasn't the end of my story. It was the beginning. The first few weeks after the barbecue felt like living in a bad dream. Everywhere I turned, people were congratulating Jason and his fiancée, Rebecca, on their new home. At church, neighbors would pat my parents on the back, saying how proud they must be. And me? I was the invisible one, the daughter who had suddenly decided not to go to grad school. Inside, I was boiling. I'd worked hard my entire life. Straight A's, internships, late nights balancing part-time jobs with classes. That money was supposed to be mine, a reward for years of sacrifice. And now it was tied up in a house Jason barely deserved. At first, I tried to reason with my parents. I sat them down and said, "You promised me that money. You've been telling me for years it was mine for school." My mom sighed, like I was a child throwing a tantrum. "Cindy, you're young. You'll have opportunities. Jason doesn't. He needs stability now." My dad chimed in, "Family helps family. You're being selfish." Selfish. The word hit me like a slap. I walked out that night, my ears burning, swearing I wouldn't ask them for another cent. But life doesn't wait for you to get even. Rent was due, groceries had to be bought, and my savings were shrinking. I picked up extra shifts at the coffee shop, started freelancing online, and buried myself in work. And then, about 3 months later, I overheard something that made me pause. Jason was bragging at a family dinner about how he might rent out a room in his new house for some side income. He said it so casually, not even realizing the irony. He'd used my college fund, my future, to secure a place he was already thinking of monetizing. That was the night the anger sharpened into something else. Determination. I wasn't going to yell or beg anymore. I wasn't going to try to convince them of my worth. Instead, I was going to make sure that when everything came crashing down, and it would, they'd look back and realize exactly what they'd lost when they chose Jason over me. And as fate would have it, the cracks were already starting to show. I didn't have to wait long for karma to get to work. At first, Jason and Rebecca's new life looked flawless. They posted endless Instagram stories about their dream home, their DIY projects, and their weekend barbecues. My parents would beam with pride every time they mentioned it. It was nauseating. But a house is more than a photo backdrop. It's a mortgage, bills, repairs, property taxes. Jason wasn't built for responsibility, and deep down, I knew it was only a matter of time before he slipped. That first slip came 6 months after the move-in. I was visiting my parents when Jason stormed through the door, pacing like a maniac. Rebecca trailed behind him, teary-eyed. Apparently, he'd missed 2 mortgage payments because the market wasn't good for his latest business scheme, a drop-shipping store selling gym gear. I sat quietly in the corner, sipping my coffee, listening. My parents immediately started brainstorming ways to help him. "Maybe we can loan you a little," my mom said, wringing her hands. My dad nodded, already reaching for his checkbook. That was my breaking point. I set my mug down and said, calmly, "Don't. He needs to figure it out." "That's what you told me, right? It builds character." The silence that followed was thick enough to choke on. Jason glared at me like I'd kicked his dog, but I just smiled. For the first time, I felt like I had the upper hand. Later that night, as I lay in bed, I started piecing together a plan. I didn't need to sabotage Jason directly, he was doing a fine job of that himself. All I had to do was make sure when things collapsed, I was standing tall, unshaken, and visible to everyone who had overlooked me. So I doubled down. I worked insane hours, picked up freelance design contracts, and slowly began to build up my own savings again. I also started networking with people in my field, making connections my brother could only dream of. And then came the call that shifted everything. A family friend rang me up, her voice hushed but urgent. "Cindy, I don't know if you've heard, but your parents are losing everything." I didn't even flinch. I just smiled into the phone and said, "I know." Because by then, I had already seen it coming. The family friend wasn't exaggerating. My parents' downfall didn't happen overnight, it came in slow, devastating waves. The first hit was the housing market. Prices in our area had spiked when Jason bought his house, but within a year, interest rates shot up and values dipped. Suddenly, that investment my parents bragged about wasn't worth nearly what they thought. Worse? Jason's mortgage wasn't just straining him, it was dragging them down too. See, my parents had co-signed. That's the part they never told me. When Jason couldn't get approved for the loan on his own, my parents put their names on it. Which meant when he missed payments, the bank came knocking at their door as well. The second hit was my dad's job. He'd worked for the same manufacturing plant for over 20 years, but the company downsized. At 56, he wasn't exactly in demand anymore. Severance money ran thin fast, and my mom's small bookkeeping gig wasn't enough to cover all their bills. I'll never forget the night I overheard my parents whispering in the kitchen. My dad's voice cracked when he said, "We might lose the house." My mom just kept repeating, "We'll figure it out, we always do." Except this time, they wouldn't. And I didn't lift a finger to help. I could have. By then, I was starting to climb financially. My freelance jobs were paying well, and I'd been smart with my savings. I had the means to step in, to be the bigger person. But I didn't. They hadn't hesitated to gut my future for Jason's benefit. Why should I rescue them from the mess they created? Instead, I played my role perfectly. I listened when they complained, nodded sympathetically, even offered vague advice. I never gloated, never said, "I told you so." That was the beauty of it, my silence said everything. Meanwhile, Jason was unraveling. His dropshipping store had tanked, his credit cards were maxed out, and Rebecca was constantly fighting with him. Rumors started spreading around town about how the golden boy was in way over his head. And me? I kept building. I landed a stable job at an architecture firm in Columbus, rented a nice apartment, and finally started living the life I'd dreamed of, without a cent of their help. By the time the foreclosure notice hit my parents' mailbox, I wasn't shocked. I was ready. This was the beginning of my revenge, not through sabotage, but through success. It's strange watching someone who always acted untouchable start to crumble. Jason had built his entire identity around being the successful one. To the outside world, he was the charming older brother who had it all together. But the cracks were spreading faster than he could patch them. The first major crack was Rebecca. She'd always loved the image of Jason, the man with the house, the man with a future, the man whose parents practically worshipped him. But once the bills started stacking up, she realized what I'd known all along: Jason was a fraud. He wasn't stable. He wasn't ambitious. He was reckless. I heard from a mutual friend that Rebecca moved out one weekend while Jason was at work. Took half the furniture, her clothes, and even the dog. She left him a note on the kitchen counter: "I can't do this anymore. I need security, not chaos." Jason showed up at my parents' that night, red-eyed and furious. He stormed around the living room, cursing Rebecca, the bank, the system, everyone but himself. My mom rubbed his back, whispering, "It's going to be okay, sweetheart." My dad poured him a whiskey and told him to stay strong. I sat in the corner, arms crossed, biting back a smile. The second crack came when Jason's truck got repossessed. He'd been missing payments for months, and one morning, the tow truck just rolled up and hauled it away in front of the neighbors. Word spread fast. Suddenly, Mr. Goldenchild wasn't looking so shiny anymore. By then, my parents were drowning in their own problems. They were months behind on their mortgage, collection letters piled on the kitchen counter, and the stress was eating them alive. My mom lost weight she couldn't afford to lose, and my dad's temper was shorter than ever. And still, through all of it, they never once apologized to me. Never acknowledged what they'd taken, what they'd stolen. That silence burned more than anything else. But it also fueled me. Because I knew the confrontation was coming. And when it did, I wasn't going to yell. I wasn't going to cry. I was going to let the truth hit them harder than any insult ever could. I was patient. I waited. And then, one night, Jason and my parents asked me to meet them at the house. They had something important to discuss. I already knew what was coming. When my parents asked me to come over for dinner, I almost said no. I knew it wasn't about family time. They hadn't invited me over just to share a meal. Something was brewing, and I had a feeling I knew exactly what it was. I showed up anyway, dressed neatly, calm, prepared. The kitchen smelled like my mom's meatloaf, but there was no warmth in the air. Jason was already there, slouched at the table, dark circles under his eyes. My dad sat with his arms folded, while my mom fidgeted with her napkin. "Cindy," my dad started, his tone unusually careful. "We wanted to talk to you about helping out the family." I leaned back in my chair. "Helping out how?" Jason jumped in, defensive already. "You've got a good job now. You're doing fine. But Mom and Dad are struggling." "I'm struggling. We need." I cut him off with a raised hand. "You need money." No one spoke, but their silence said it all. I let the pause linger, watching them squirm. Then I asked, "Why me? Why don't you ask Rebecca?" "Oh wait, she left. Or maybe the bank. Oh wait, they're already taking the house." Jason slammed his fist on the table. "This isn't funny, Cindy. We're family. Families help each other." I felt my lips curl into a small, cold smile. "Funny, that's exactly what you said when you used my college fund to buy your house." Only back then, helping family meant me losing everything I'd worked for. My mom's eyes filled with tears. "Cindy, please, things are different now. We were trying to give Jason a chance." "And what about me?" My voice was steady, but sharper now. "What about my chance? You took it, and you didn't even hesitate. And now you want me to bail you out?" The room went dead silent. Jason muttered something under his breath about me being selfish, but I leaned forward, staring him down. "No, Jason. I'm not selfish. I learned from the best." I stood up, smoothing my jacket. "I won't give you a cent. You made your choices. Now you live with them." As I walked out, I heard my mom sob quietly, my dad muttering in frustration, and Jason swearing under his breath. But I didn't look back. For the first time in my life, I wasn't the forgotten daughter or the backup plan. I was the one holding all the power. And I wasn't done yet. The confrontation at my parents' house was a turning point. After that night, I stopped pretending. I didn't show up for family dinners, I didn't take their calls unless absolutely necessary, and I sure as hell didn't let them guilt me into carrying their burdens. Instead, I focused on me. My architecture firm had just landed a big contract designing a mixed-use development downtown. I'd been working my tail off, staying late, putting in the kind of effort that got noticed. And it did. My boss pulled me into his office one afternoon and told me I was being promoted to project lead. That meant a raise. A significant one. The news spread fast, LinkedIn announcements, office chatter, even a little feature in a local business newsletter. People who used to look past me suddenly took notice. My parents' friends started congratulating me at the grocery store instead of Jason. And that was the sweetest revenge. I didn't have to rub anything in his face. My success spoke louder than any words could. Meanwhile, Jason was unraveling in real time. Rebecca filed for divorce within months of leaving him. His credit was ruined, his reputation was shot, and he was bouncing between part-time jobs he could barely keep. He moved back into my parents' house, sleeping in his old bedroom like a teenager. The contrast was almost laughable. At a family friend's wedding, we ran into each other. I showed up in a sleek black dress, confident, smiling, while Jason looked like he hadn't shaved in a week. People kept pulling me aside to ask about my career, my projects, my future. Jason stood on the sidelines, ignored, nursing a drink. At one point, he muttered as I passed, "Don't get too comfortable, Cindy. Life has a way of humbling people." I stopped, looked him straight in the eye, and said, "Funny, you should know." He didn't have a comeback. That night, I realized my revenge wasn't just about watching them lose everything. It was about finally stepping into the spotlight they tried so hard to keep me out of. But I wasn't satisfied yet. I wanted the whole town, the people who'd always praised Jason while overlooking me, to see the truth. To know exactly who he was, and who I'd become. And I had the perfect opportunity coming up. The opportunity came sooner than I expected. My firm was hosting a ribbon-cutting ceremony for the first phase of the downtown development project I'd been leading. It was a big deal, local officials, press, business leaders, all invited. And as the project lead, I was asked to give a short speech about the vision and process behind the design. It was the kind of moment you dream about when you're starting out. And for me, it was more than professional, it was personal. Because I knew the guest list would circulate through town, and word would spread. My parents, Jason, they would hear about it. I didn't invite them. But they came anyway. When I spotted them lingering near the back of the crowd, I almost laughed. My dad looked stiff in a suit that didn't quite fit anymore. My mom clutched her purse like it was a lifeline. Jason stood off to the side, hands in his pockets, trying to look casual but failing. I took the stage. The microphone felt heavy in my hand, but my voice was steady. I spoke about my passion for architecture, about how the design would bring new life to a struggling part of the city, about the future. People clapped, nodded, smiled. Cameras flashed. When I finished, the mayor shook my hand, calling me a rising star. My boss gave me a proud pat on the back. Strangers came up to introduce themselves, eager to work with me. And out of the corner of my eye, I saw them, my parents and Jason, watching. My mom's face was pale, my dad's jaw tight, and Jason, he looked small. Smaller than I'd ever seen him. For once, I wasn't the background character in their story. I was the headline. After the ceremony, my parents tried to approach me. My mom reached out, her voice trembling. "Cindy, we're so proud of you." I met her eyes, calm and cool. "Are you proud of me?" Or just surprised I didn't drown when you threw me overboard? She froze, and I walked away before she could answer. That night, lying in bed, I realized something. Revenge didn't always have to be about destruction. Sometimes, it was about showing the world who you really are, without them. But I wasn't finished. Because while I'd risen higher, Jason and my parents were still sinking lower. And I wanted to make sure they hit rock bottom. Jason's downfall wasn't a single explosion, it was a slow collapse, brick by brick. And honestly, it was almost poetic watching it happen. After Rebecca left him and the truck got repossessed, he tried to salvage his pride by bragging about new opportunities. He'd say things like, "I'm about to land a big contract," or, "I've got a buddy who wants to invest in my next venture." But everyone knew it was hot air. The house was the final blow. With my parents already behind on their own mortgage, they couldn't keep covering for Jason. The bank foreclosed, and just like that, his shiny suburban dream home, the one bought with my college fund, was gone. I remember driving past the place one afternoon. The grass was overgrown, a foreclosure sign staked in the front yard. Strangers were walking through during an open house, inspecting rooms Jason once bragged about. It felt like justice. Word spread quickly in our small town. People who once gushed over Jason started whispering about him instead. He became a cautionary tale, a man who had everything handed to him and still managed to lose it all. Meanwhile, I kept climbing. My promotion wasn't the end, it was just the beginning. Within months, I was managing a team, signing off on designs, and traveling to present at conferences. My savings grew, and for the first time in my life, I felt secure. The contrast between us couldn't have been sharper. At family gatherings, what few I still attended, Jason would sulk in the corner, mumbling about how the system screwed him. I'd arrive polished, confident, with people asking me about my projects. It wasn't just revenge anymore. It was vindication. And then came the night Jason called me. His voice was broken, slurred from drinking. "Cindy. I need help. I don't got anyone else. Please." For a moment, I almost pitied him. Almost. But then I remembered that day, the barbecue, the laughter, the moment my future was stolen from me so he could play house. And I felt nothing but cold clarity. "I hope you figure it out, Jason," I said, before hanging up. And that was the moment I knew. He had lost everything. And I had one. Not long after Jason's house was gone, my parents' world came crashing down too. They had spent years propping him up, bailing him out, co-signing loans, and draining every bit of savings they had left. When Jason fell, he dragged them down with him. It started with little things, my mom selling her jewelry to cover some bills, my dad taking odd handyman jobs around town, things he never would have considered back when he had steady work at the plant. Then the big blow came, foreclosure. Their house, the place I'd grown up in, was repossessed by the bank. I drove by one morning and saw the same ugly orange notice slapped on the front door that had once been on Jason's. I thought it might hurt more, seeing my childhood home like that. But it didn't. All I felt was a strange sense of finality. The house wasn't home anymore. It was just another monument to their bad choices. The shame hit them harder than the financial loss. In a town like ours, word travels fast. Everyone knew. Neighbors who once admired my parents now whispered behind their backs. Invitations stopped coming. They weren't the proud parents of the successful son anymore. They were the couple who gambled everything on him and lost. One evening, my mom called me. Her voice was small, almost unrecognizable. "Cindy, your dad and we don't know where to go." I let the silence stretch. Finally, I said, "You should have thought about that before you chose Jason over me." She tried to apologize, stumbling over the words, but it was too late. I wasn't interested in apologies that came only after everything was gone. They ended up moving into a small rental apartment on the outskirts of town. Jason, of course, moved right in with them, dragging his misery along. 3 people crammed into a 2-bedroom unit, living off scraps, while I was thriving. And the irony? The very people who once told me to figure it out were now the ones completely lost. It was everything I'd wanted, to see them face the consequences. But I wasn't finished yet. Because revenge wasn't just about watching them lose. It was about making sure they understood exactly what they'd thrown away. And I had the perfect plan for that. By the time my parents and Jason hit rock bottom, I had everything they thought I'd never achieve without their help. A stable career, financial security, and respect in the community. And I wanted them to see it. To feel it. The opportunity came when I was asked to speak at a local career fair at my old high school. They wanted me to talk about my journey into architecture, about perseverance and building a future. It wasn't lost on me that I was the kind of success story they wanted to showcase, the one they'd ignored when I was a student there. I agreed. And I made sure my parents knew about it. The gymnasium was packed, students, teachers, parents, even some local reporters. I stood at the podium, polished and confident, and told my story. Not the sanitized version either. I spoke honestly about setbacks, about having to rebuild when everything I'd saved for was taken from me, about how I learned to stand on my own. I didn't mention Jason or my parents by name. I didn't need to. Everyone in that room knew exactly who I was talking about. And when I finished, the applause was deafening. I glanced to the side of the room, and there they were, my mom, pale and teary-eyed, my dad, stone-faced and stiff, Jason, sinking into his seat like he wanted to disappear. That was the moment they realized it. They had gambled everything on Jason, believing he'd be the one to make them proud. And the daughter they dismissed, the one they told to figure it out, had become everything they wanted him to be. Afterward, people came up to shake my hand, to thank me, to tell me how inspiring I was. My parents hung back, hesitant, while Jason slipped out the side door. Eventually, my mom approached, her voice trembling. "Cindy, we should have believed in you. We were wrong." I looked at her for a long moment, then simply said, "Yes. You were." And I walked away. That was my revenge, not screaming, not destroying them, but forcing them to live with the undeniable truth. I had become everything they wanted, without them. And Jason, their chosen son, was nothing but a failure. After the career fair, word about my speech spread like wildfire. The local paper ran a short piece about it, calling me a homegrown success story. My firm's leadership loved the attention, and before long, they were sending me to more conferences and public events. I was becoming a recognizable name in my field. Meanwhile, life for my parents and Jason grew smaller and smaller. Their little rental on the edge of town became a kind of cage. Jason never held down a steady job. He bounced between warehouse shifts and delivery gigs, always quitting or getting fired. My dad picked up handyman work when he could, but it was never enough. My mom took bookkeeping jobs here and there, but she looked older every time I saw her, like the weight of regret had aged her by a decade. Whenever people asked them about me, they'd force a smile and claim they were so proud. But I knew the truth. I saw it in their eyes, the jealousy, the shame, the quiet realization that they'd chosen wrong. I, on the other hand, was thriving. I moved into a beautiful loft apartment downtown with tall windows that filled the space with morning light. I bought myself a car outright, no loans, no co-signers. And I started dating a man named Mark, a civil engineer I'd met on one of my projects. He was steady, kind, and supportive, the opposite of everything Jason had ever been. I didn't flaunt any of it directly to my parents. I didn't have to. Every time I posted about a new milestone, every time a neighbor mentioned me to them, it cut deeper than anything I could ever say to their faces. Jason, of course, hated it. He avoided me at family gatherings, and when he couldn't, he'd mutter things like, "You just got lucky," or "It won't last." But those words didn't sting anymore. They only confirmed what I already knew. He couldn't stand seeing me succeed where he had failed. It was ironic, really. My parents thought giving him my future would make him strong, but it only exposed his weakness. And they thought denying me would break me, but it only made me stronger. And the best part? I wasn't even done rising. Bigger opportunities were waiting for me just around the corner. The call came on an ordinary Tuesday afternoon. I was at my desk, going over blueprints, when my boss asked me to step into his office. I half expected another project assignment, but what he said floored me. "Cindy, the board has decided. We want you to be the lead architect on our new headquarters project. It's the biggest commission we've landed in years." I blinked at him, stunned. This wasn't just another job, it was the kind of project that made careers, the kind people in my industry spent decades chasing. And they were handing it to me at 26. I accepted without hesitation. The announcement went public a week later. My name was in the press again, this time in regional papers and even a couple of national design blogs. Colleagues congratulated me non-stop. My LinkedIn inbox exploded with offers and opportunities. It felt like the moment all those long nights, sacrifices, and betrayals had been leading toward. And, of course, word made its way back home. At a community fundraiser my mom attended, someone apparently brought it up. "Isn't Cindy doing amazing things with that architecture firm? You must be so proud." My mom told me later she just smiled weakly and nodded. But when she recounted the story, her voice cracked. Jason, on the other hand, couldn't stand it. At the next family dinner, one I almost skipped, he snapped at me across the table. "You think you're better than everyone now, don't you?" I set down my fork and looked at him evenly. "No, Jason. I've always been capable. You just never wanted to see it." The table went silent. My dad cleared his throat, trying to change the subject, but the damage was done. Jason stormed out, slamming the door behind him. And I just sat there, calm, knowing I'd finally cemented my place. They couldn't deny me anymore. The girl they'd written off, the daughter they'd sacrificed, had become everything they'd wanted their son to be, and more. For me, it wasn't just success. It was closure. But the real ending wasn't just about me rising. It was about what came next, how I chose to live, now that I'd proven everything I needed to prove. For years, my drive came from anger. I worked harder, pushed further, and climbed higher because I wanted them to see me, to regret what they'd done. And I'd achieved that. Jason had nothing, my parents were broke and ashamed, and I stood tall on everything they thought I'd never accomplish. But somewhere along the way, my focus shifted. It wasn't about them anymore. It was about me. Mark and I grew closer as my career soared. He was steady in ways my family never had been, encouraging without envy, proud without conditions. With him, I realized something I hadn't felt in years. I didn't have to fight for love or approval. It was given freely. We started building a life together. Weekend trips, plans for the future, quiet mornings in our loft where the sunlight poured in and coffee steamed between us. For the first time, I felt like I was building a family of my own, one rooted in trust, not betrayal. Meanwhile, my parents and Jason stayed stuck. Their rental was shabby, their finances still in shambles. Jason cycled through jobs, always bitter, always blaming someone else. My mom still called occasionally, her voice heavy with regret, trying to mend what couldn't be fixed. My dad, too proud to admit defeat, mostly stayed silent. But I didn't feel anger toward them anymore. I felt distance. They were like strangers I used to know, people who had once held power over me but no longer did. I had chosen my own path. And with every step, I left their mistakes further behind. Sometimes, people asked if I'd ever forgive them. And maybe, someday, I would. But forgiveness wasn't my priority. Peace was. And I had found it, not in their apologies, but in the life I had built without them. Jason could stew in regret. My parents could live with their shame. That was their burden to carry. Mine was lighter, freedom, love, and the knowledge that I had not just survived their betrayal, I had thrived beyond it. It took years, but I finally understood something. Revenge had never really been about destroying Jason or punishing my parents. It was about proving, first to them and then to myself, that I was never the weak one. And I had done that. One crisp autumn morning, Mark and I stood in front of a townhouse we just closed on. The keys were warm in my hand, and as we walked inside, sunlight spilling across the hardwood floors, I felt a deep sense of peace settle over me. This wasn't a house bought with someone else's money, or a debt disguised as a gift. It was ours, earned, honest, and free of the past. I thought about the path that had brought me here, the betrayal, the anger, the sleepless nights working 3 jobs, the long climb to where I stood now. And I thought about my parents, sitting in their cramped rental with Jason sulking in the next room. Once, that thought would have made me smile with satisfaction. Now, it just made me shrug. They weren't my responsibility anymore. Their choices had built their reality, just as mine had built mine. A few weeks later, I got a letter from my mom. It was handwritten, shaky, and full of apologies. She wrote that she and Dad wished they could undo what they'd done, that they hoped someday I could let them back into my life. I folded it up, placed it in a drawer, and left it unanswered. Some doors, once closed, don't need reopening. Instead, I poured my energy into my own life. My career kept climbing, bigger projects, more recognition. Mark and I started talking seriously about marriage. I traveled, met new people, built friendships with people who saw me for who I truly was. And in all of it, I felt free. Free from their expectations. Free from their betrayal. Free to live on my terms. Revenge had given me strength. Success had given me peace. And now, for the first time, happiness was mine, completely, unapologetically mine. That was the real ending. Not their downfall. But my rise.